Many of us have seen abandoned cities and ghost towns in movies and on TV. They may seem like total fiction, but they actually exist in reality too. And in this video, we will be looking at the largest abandoned cities in the world. Number 8. Bodie, California. Bodie, California is a 202 hectare town in the Bodie Hills, around 75 miles southeast of Lake Tahoe. During the California gold rush in the early 1800s, this was one of the most popular mining towns to live in. It used to house over 10,000 people at one time. At the time of the town's peak, it had everything: several daily newspapers, at least 65 saloons, a bank, 4 fire companies, a jail, its own cemetery and mortuary, and even had 2 stamp mills. The gold that the miners got from Bodie is said to be valued at around $35 million. But within 10 years of the town's peak, the miners that made up most of the town's population began to look to other mining towns where they could move to and continue making money. As they moved, the town went from a booming mining town to more of a tight-knit community housing just a few families. The remaining residents of the town even built a Methodist church and thought they would live in the town for generations, but that is far from what happened. In 1913, the Standard Consolidated Mine of Bodie, California closed down for good. By 1917, the town had been showing considerable signs of being abandoned, to the point that the iron from the railway tracks were stolen too. Over the next 30 years, the town emptied out. In 1961, it was declared to be a National Historic Landmark and is named California's official state gold rush ghost town. With 170 buildings still standing where they did in the 1800s, this town, with a population of 0, is now a tourist attraction. People visit Bodie, but no one can live there. Number 7. Chengdu China. Almost all the products we buy today have the Made in China label on them. But did you know China even made its own Paris? Yep, the town of Chengdu is a full replica of Paris, spanning over 31 square kilometers. Everything from the layout to the facade of the buildings and the tree plantations all are the exact same as they are in the real city of Paris. And that's not all. The city even comes with its own Eiffel Tower, standing at 300 feet tall, and also has its own version of the fountain and Luxembourg Gardens, along with the gardens themselves. The way this town was built, it was supposed to make people want to move to this Paris instead of the real one. But that never really happened. Apart from a few people here and there that come to see the mini Eiffel Tower, no one's really rushing in to buy any property here. The town was made to house around 10,000 people, but the only people that actually live there are the ones that have to because they work in the French-themed amusement park near the city. On holidays, when they too go back to their hometowns, this version of Paris sits completely abandoned. Number 6. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Fires burn, and eventually they burn out. And that may be true for regular fires, but that is not the case for Centralia, Pennsylvania. On May 27, 1962, a coal mine dump was to be cleaned up. To clean it up, it was lit on fire. The fire got out of control and made its way to the actual mine, and it caught on fire. And it has been burning ever since. As the fire burnt, the temperatures of the town above kept rising. It's reported that it literally reached 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It became hotter than the surface of Mercury and became virtually unlivable. Experts say that this type of fire that burns for several lifetimes is expected to stay lit for another 250 years at least. 7 people still lived in Centralia in 2017 and didn't want to move out. They reached an agreement with the government that stated that they would be allowed to live out their lives in the town, and upon their deaths, their homes will be seized. Once they've all passed, the 62-acre town of Centralia will have a population of 0 and will be entirely seized by the government. Number 5. Varsha Cyprus. Varsha used to be one of the most popular tourist attractions in the entire world. People from all over the world, including celebrities, would visit the site, and it was a hustling and bustling day and night until it was invaded by the Turkish forces in 1974. The inhabitants of the area fled during this time, and the area was warded off, with no one allowed in or out other than the Turkish military personnel. All of the buildings from the era still stand. Although they are decaying, most of the lower floors have been taken over by vegetation, and the streets look like forests. Although the Turkish government has plans of reopening the city to tourism, as of right now it is still an abandoned city, and probably will remain that way for a long time. Number 4. Ruby, Arizona. The town of Ruby in Santa Cruz, Arizona is one of the biggest names in mining history of the U.S. It didn't just have a single type of mine, but instead had mines that produced gold, silver, lead, zinc, and copper. In the 1930s, Ruby had a population of around 1,200, and everyone worked the mines. In the late 1930s, Ruby was the largest producer of lead and zinc in Arizona. But something haunted the town. It was the site of the infamous Ruby murders, the series of murders that happened in the area that claimed the lives of 6 people in 3 separate incidents. The search for the suspects led to the largest manhunt in the history of the Southwest. Something like this is hard for a town to shake off. Even though it was doing well as a mining town throughout the 1930s, the mine closed down in 1940, and within the next year, the town of Ruby was abandoned. Today, it's an entirely privately owned property. The buildings like the town schools, playgrounds, houses, and jails are preserved under a roof to protect it from the elements in nature. It is somewhat of a time capsule and is exactly the way it was in 1940, perfectly preserved. In fact, it is one of the best preserved western towns in all of the U.S. As for the population, only 2 people still live in the 121 hectares of Ruby, the owners of the land. People who are allowed to visit the area for a fee, but it's unlikely that it will ever be open for people to live in ever again. Number 3. Whitton, Australia. Australia is known to be the country where anything can kill you. This would usually include deadly insects and animals, but for the town of Whitton, it's literally the air. Whitton was one of the largest mining sites for blue asbestos, the material that used to be in construction because of its fire-resistant properties. The town is 50,000 hectares in size. In the early 1900s, mysterious deaths started being noticed all over the world wherever there were asbestos mines. The deaths were in the thousands. The town of Whitton lost over 2,000 people to the contamination, and the town had to be evacuated to save the rest of the people. The town was so dangerous that it had to be wiped off the map of Australia in 2007 in an effort to try to keep people from going there. In 2019, Whitton still had 3 residents that were refusing to move. The government ordered them to leave, and as of now, the entire town has a population of 1. The 1 resident is said to be forced out of the town too. Experts have reported that the contamination runs so deep in Whitton that it could never be considered safe for humans to live in. Number 2. Ashgabat Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan is a former Soviet country. It was the capital of Turkmen Soviet Social Republic in 1942. The giant 440 square kilometer city was made to resemble a European city. It had buildings, shops, and hotels that gave a European vibe, but in 1948, the Ashgabat earthquake destroyed almost all of the town. In 1991, the president of Turkmenistan announced that he wanted to begin the golden era of Turkmenistan, and the golden era included rebuilding Ashgabat. The rebuilding wasn't just making the buildings whole again, it included fully redoing the whole city, and all of the largest buildings were covered in marble, entirely. The buildings broke records. It literally holds the Guinness World Record for having the highest density of white marble buildings. In total, 543 buildings were made, with 4,513,584 square meters of white marble. In addition to the buildings, Ashgabat also houses the largest Ferris wheel in the world. With how much money went into setting up the city, it became one of the most expensive places to live in. But somehow, people still didn't flock to it. Despite all of its attractions, Ashgabat is a ghost town. Number 1. Pripyat, Ukraine. Pripyat, Ukraine was home to one of the biggest tragedies the world has ever seen. The town was initially founded in 1970 and was supposed to be a nuclear city. The 658,700 square mile city was made so that people that worked in the Chernobyl power plant could live there. It was a fully functioning city with 13,000 apartments, schools, factories, cafes, cinemas, and a hospital. The town was bustling right up until April 26, 1986. When a reactor blew up in the Chernobyl plant. Toxic air was released into the air, and the entire town had to be evacuated immediately. People were packed into buses and taken out of the radiation zone to keep them safe. Pripyat was abandoned and warded off as a nuclear exclusion zone. Even though the radiation levels have decreased, the town may never be safe enough to ever house people ever again. All that's there is a haunting image of what life was before the explosion. That concludes our roundup of the largest abandoned cities in the world. To watch more videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to our channel, and we will see you in the next one.